Will you pray with me? Loving and faithful God, this morning I pray that you simply let the words of my mouth, the meditations of our collective hearts simply be acceptable. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So good morning. I don't know if any of you at all know the story of Tamar. She's the second Tamar in the Bible. So we're going to look at 2 Samuel 13 today, just to give you a little background. I said we've never done a series since I've been here. So here's a sermon series. So for the next 6 sermons, you'll get things based on Never on Sunday, in which we examine scriptures that don't appear in our Revised Common Lectionary, but we still can find some lessons in them. The lectionary covers almost all of the 4 Gospels, about 20% of the Protestant Bible overall in the course of 3 years. It's a little lower if you include the Deuterocanonical books in the total, and higher if you include the daily readings. So there are many stories, many points of view that just simply don't get shared. And I thought it would be a challenging experience for us to hear and examine a few of those stories. So we're going to hear the story of Tamar in 2 Samuel, but I will say it works really well, but it would have been a 30-minute sermon to pair this story with Abigail in 1 Samuel. They're kind of juxtaposed characters, and there's some redemption happening if you have them in conversation with one another. And I'm always happy to talk about that, but if we talked about that today, I would be up here till noon. All right. So 2 Samuel 13, I'm going to read it from the Message, which is a paraphrase. And I'm going to tell you a little story. So sometime later, this happened. Absalom, David's son, had a sister who was very attractive. Her name was Tamar. Amnon, also David's son, was in love with her. Amnon was obsessed with his sister Tamar to the point of making himself sick over her. She was a virgin, so he couldn't see how he could get his hands on her. Amnon had a good friend named Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemaiah. Jonadab was exceptionally savvy. He said to Amnon, "Why are you moping around?" And it's just, it's more of a sister-in-law than a sister. They're not blood related. Why are you moping around like this day after day? You, the son of the king, tell me what's eating at you. In a word, Tamar, he said, my brother Absalom's sister. I'm in love with her. Here's what you do, said Jonadab. Go to bed, pretend you're sick. When your father comes to visit you, say, have my sister Tamar come and prepare some supper for me here, where I can watch her and she can feed me. See where this is going, right? So Amnon took to his bed, acted frail and sick when the king came to visit, and said, would you do me a favor? Have my sister Tamar come and make some nourishing dumplings for me, where I can watch her and be fed by her. David sent word to Tamar, who was at home at the time, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare him a sick meal. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's home. She took dough and kneaded it, formed it into dumplings, and cooked them while he watched from his bed. But when she took the cooking pot and served him, he refused her and would not eat. Amnon said, clear everyone out of the house. And all the servants and everyone left the house. Then he said to Tamar, bring the food into my bedroom so we can eat in privacy. She took the nourishing dumplings that she had prepared and brought them to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she got ready to feed him, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, sister. She protested. No, brother, don't hurt me. This kind of thing isn't done in Israel. Don't do this terrible thing. Where could I ever show my face? And you'll be out on the street in disgrace. Please speak to the king. He'll let you marry me. But he wouldn't listen. Being much stronger than she, he raped her. No sooner had Amnon raped her than he hated her. An immense hatred. The hatred that he felt for her was greater than the love he had. Get up and get out, he said. Oh no, brother, please. This is even worse of an evil than what you just did to me, casting me out. But he wouldn't listen. He called for his valet. Get rid of this woman. Get her out of my sight. Lock the door after her. The valet threw her out and locked the door. She was wearing a long sleeve gown which is what virgin princesses used to dress in. Tamar poured ashes on her head, then she ripped the gown, held her head in her hands, and walked away, sobbing as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has your brother Amnon had his way with you?" "Now, sister, let's keep it quiet, a family matter. He is, after all, your brother. Don't take it so hard." Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's home, bitter and desolate. King David heard the entire story and was enraged, but he chose not to discipline Amnon. David doted on him because he was his firstborn. Absalom quit speaking to Amnon, not a word, whether good or bad, because he hated him for violating his sister. This is the word of God. All right. So Michael Twitty has a brilliant book. It's called The Cooking Gene, A Journey Through African-American Cultural and Culinary History in the Old South. And I was kind of reading both at the same time. He writes, the kitchen in slavery was a sinister place. The kitchen is where we acquired the eyes of our oppressors, their blood and bones and cheeks blush. The kitchen was, perhaps more than any other space, the site of rape, sexual violations that led to one or more of the unique aspects of the African-American identity. Our almost inextricable blood connection to white Southerners. The end of slavery didn't stop the exploitation of Black women, but these incidents were harder to disguise and cover, and the consequences of these wars had more stakes, understood in the South. As Caroline Randall Williams, co-author of Soul Food, once said, "We're rape colored. Our trigger is the mirror." Investigation of the kitchen as a sinister or dangerous place for women, noting judicial records from the 18th century, even in London, cite the kitchen as a common location for assault or the beginnings of assault on female servants because it was separated from other parts of the house and unmonitored by the supervising wife. In these two instances, both in slavery and in our story today, the kitchen was the beginning of where violence was going to happen. It was a space of dangerous vulnerability. After reading this statement in Twitty's book, my mind jumped to this story. Another woman, though not enslaved, she was a princess. Another kitchen, at least where it started. More dangerous vulnerability resulting in rape. Thinking about the story of Tamar alongside of enslaved and working class women in kitchens, and even people who've worked in kitchens today, we can understand and consider some of the reasons why kitchens or cooking historically were places of dangerous vulnerability for women. And whether or not it was just because they were places where women with little social power might be found, who knows? Could it also be because there was an intimacy inherent in the cooking and serving of food? We read this text and she's talking about feeding, and that's an intimate act. Cooking and consuming are relational activities. Does the relational nature of preparing and serving food create an inherently vulnerable space? If vulnerability is created when people, especially women, cook and serve food, does this vulnerability always lead to undesirable situations or violence? Again, I invite you to read Abigail's story. It'll show you a better redeeming option. To echo the words of Twitty, is the kitchen or cooking a sinister place, even in our scriptural narratives? So let's turn to Samuel 2, or 2 Samuel 13, and Tamar's story. David has won the battle for kingship, and the house of Saul, David's reign, has faced threats from outside enemies, as well as family members, but he's overcome them all. His sons are now grown, and they're kind of jockeying for power within the kingdom. It's against this backdrop that this story is set. So it's reported that Amnon, son of David, is infatuated. If you read some of the other, like I was talking to Hugh about his book, it's infatuated. It's a deep desire who he has for Tamar, this beautiful obsession. And this had apparently made him weak or faux sick, as I like to say, with her as she was a virgin. Amnon's cousin, Jonadab, suggests this plan, and we know that it works, right? Amnon enacts the plan. He pretends to be sick and asks his father to send Tamar to it. She prepares these cakes and their pride. It says dumplings in this translation, but the word employed for the food she prepares is levavot. And it's meant to enact the word lavav, which is heart or inner being. So they're heart-shaped dumplings. In our food and faith class in seminary, we simply name this sick food, but chicken noodle soup, matzo ball soup, those things that you would crave as comfort. David instructs Tamar as Amnon has requested. She complies, arriving at his house, cooking the cakes, evidently oblivious to the plan, right? Although Tamar is part of the royal family, I cannot help but be reminded of working in kitchens and kind of being watched by chefs or managers or those kind of things. We can all imagine as women, men delighting in watching a woman work to meet his appetite for food. But in this case, the appetite is something else, right? It's not food. It's a sexual appetite that he's planning on satisfying. After the cakes are finished, she seems not to feed him with her hand right away as requested. Maybe she had a gut feeling that she was in danger. I've had that kind of, this doesn't feel right kind of moment. Amnon refuses to eat and orders everyone in the house to leave, leaving her even more vulnerable. In verse 11, when she approaches him to feed him, he seizes her. He overpowers her. I imagine she probably has bruises on her arms. And he implores her to come lie down with me. And in the biblical text, that implied you wouldn't lie in a bed with anyone that you weren't anticipating that to happen with. He makes a decision to forcefully make her comply. Not only does she say no, she appeals to his sense of decency, begging him not to make a decision that will reduce his princely stature, not just hers. She also said that David would likely agree to a situation where he could have sex with her within the bonds of a traditional cohabitation or marriage agreement. He does not heed her pleas, and he continues on. Immediately following this violent act, Amnon has feelings of hatred towards her. He has possessed her bodily, which is what he thought he wanted, and his infatuation has been satisfied and it's over. He orders her out of the home and his house, and she pleads with him yet again for protection. Depersonalizing Tamar by telling the servants to remove it, not her. That's the language used in the original. It's not gendered. From his house, she is left as an it, no longer a her worth considering. So we read, she tears her clothes and she tells her other brother, Absalom, who hopes to hold him accountable. Absalom punishes Amnon for raping her 2 years later when he invites him to feast celebrating the time of sheep shearing. When Amnon is drunk at the feast, Absalom orders his attendants to kill him. At the second feast, the revenge feast, Tamar is absent, and the reader doesn't know how she feels at all. She is another victim of circumstance in this story, that we are simply left to wonder if she healed, or if she was continually traumatized by what she endured at the hands of her family. Again, we learn the fates of the stars of the story, male characters, and Tamar is kind of forgotten. For many of you, I won a trivia game one day because I knew what the word Tamar meant. It means date palm, which means food and plenty. So it's interesting in this sense in the story. How many of us have heard the proverb, history is written by the victors, right? Where history is often told according to the interpretation and biases of prevailing historical actors, the winners, right? As Christians, one who follow a refugee, Jesus, who fled persecution and eventually died for his opposition to the empire's persecution of the marginalized, we get to look at stories like this and flip the script and make other folks front and center. These forgotten stories have depth and wisdom about both scriptures and even the mistakes that some of our heroes make in the biblical text. So I don't know if food preparation or serving or consumption so easily pair with this stage, this liminal stage for the drama of masculine text in this character. I believe it is repetitive, transformative. It's the embodiment and nature of food and sharing it that lends it to these purposes, that makes spaces of sharing food, preparation, magical, perhaps transformative, reconciliatory. Cooking is kind of magical when we can actually consume, making a variety of ingredients and the labor of other people physically part of our being. It should not be surprising that a transformational practice like cooking, that is half science, half art form, could naturally contribute to the space that it occurs. When we consume food, we are not only eating nature, but we are consuming all the social, economic, and relational attachments to the meals. I will return to a tried and true example of buying pizza and beer for friends who help move, right? Whenever somebody helps you move or lift heavy things, you buy pizza, right? They do so to celebrate the shared effort of the physical labor and job accomplished and to reaffirm our social bonds. By eating the pizza and sharing in the beer, you affirm that you belong to this defined group of people, obligated to each other enough to spend a Saturday moving furniture or mowing yards. Returning to our story, Tamar creates this liminal space, bringing the food from the kitchen into the bedroom. The space is rich with possibility and transformation, both for Tamar and Amnon. They both could have made different choices, different decisions in the story. But Amnon alone fails to see what he's being offered. He could have acted prudently. He could have shared his own vulnerability in accordance with political savvy. He could have curbed his short-term appetite so that he could have a long-term relationship with this woman that he clearly loved and coveted. But he chose a different path, in the end, ruining them both. Because that's what violence does. It ruins both the victim and the supposed victor. May we receive this story and honor it as our stories continue in contemporary time. May we use our tables, both here and in the real world, as places of honor, tenderness, and reconciliation.